Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we're doing another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 217 and it's titled No Take Backsies. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So, this week, our random card was suggested to us by Vintage over on Discord, and that card is Hithlain Rope. And Hithlain Rope is 2 mana for an artifact, it can't be sacrificed, and you can pay 1 and tap it to search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. The player to your right gains control of Hithlain Rope, and you can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, and once again, the player to your right gains control of Hithlain Rope. Now, if you've been following this channel for a little bit, you may know that I kind of have put this in quite a few decks, but it almost always gets recommended to either be cut or I talk about how it kind of underperformed for me. This is definitely one of those cards that I have been trying to make work for quite some time and have never really been able to do it. So with Vintage suggesting this card, it really kind of kicked me into gear to think about how can we best take advantage of this card in a way that's going to benefit us and not our opponents. And the way that I figured we could do that is with our commander this week, which is going to be Blim Comedic Genius. And Blim is 2 black-red for a 4/3 legendary creature imp. He's got flying, and whenever Blim Comedic Genius deals combat damage to a player, that player gains control of target permanent you control, then each player loses life and discards cards equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own. This essentially gives us the ability to give somebody the Hithlain Rope and then actively punish them for having that Hithlain Rope, especially because there's no real way for them to pass it back to us. Essentially, we would give it to the player to our right, who could then give it to the player to their right, and so on and so on. So it is most likely going to be at least a couple of turns before we get it back, meaning that as long as we have Blim, we can continuously deal damage and force our opponents to discard cards by giving them what is essentially kind of a group hug style of card. So not necessarily a full group hug deck, but it does want to give away some gifts, shall we say. And with that in mind, we're going to jump into some of our themes for this deck and talk about what really makes this deck work. So the first theme that I want to touch on is, of course, the gifts. We need to make sure that we have ways to give things to our opponents in a way that is more than just Blim. Because if that's the only way we have to give away our permanents to our opponents, then obviously our opponent's easiest answer to that problem is just killing Blim. If they can keep Blim off the battlefield, they can make sure that we can't give away the things we want to give away. So we do need to have backup ways to do that, and that's with cards like Bazaar Trader. And Bazaar Trader is 1 and a red for a 1/1 goblin, and you can tap it and target player gains control of target artifact, creature, or land that you control. Now, we don't really want to be giving away our lands, but we will if we have to, and we do have some artifacts and creatures that we don't mind giving away. But it is also worth mentioning that Bazaar Trader doesn't specify it has to be another creature, so it can actually give itself away if that's something we need to do. And it's definitely one of those cards that isn't going to be a massive game-changing card. It's not going to really warp the game around it, but it's a great backup engine for Blim and a great way for us to kind of sneak some other permanents into play under our opponent's control. Moving on to our second theme of the deck, this is the actual gifts that we want to be giving. Now, you may be able to guess, considering we are in the Rakdos colors of black and red, a lot of the gifts we're going to be giving are not exactly good for our opponents. And a great example of that is Demonic Lore. Demonic Lore is 2 and a black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, but at the beginning of your end step, you lose 2 life for each card in your hand. Normally, this is going to be a huge downside because drawing 3 cards means that you are almost always going to be taking at least 6 damage every single time you would play this card. But we can cast it, it'll enter, we'll draw 3 cards, and then we can use Blim or Bazaar Trader, well, scratch that, actually not Bizarre Trader, because it doesn't give away enchantments. That is a mistake that I actually made in putting this deck together, so be aware of that. But Demonic Lore is definitely one of those cards that we want to cast, get the ETB, and then give it away. Because if we can give it away with Blim, we got to draw the cards and not take the damage, meaning we can force our opponents to take the damage and not draw the cards, making it purely one-sided benefit for us and purely a one-sided downside for our opponents. Moving on to our final theme of the deck. In this case, we get to redirection and protection. Now, we're not in blue, so we don't have a lot of great ways to counter our opponent's spells, and we're not in green or white, so we don't have a lot of great creature protection. That means that if someone does catch on to what we're doing and can find ways to just keep Blim off the board, then our game plan kind of goes out the window. So we need to make sure that we have ways to protect Blim in the cases that he's targeted or attempted to be removed by our opponents. And one of the great ways we can do that is with cards like Imp's Mischief, which is 1 and a black for an instant that says change the target of target spell with a single target. You lose life equal to that spell's mana value. So in other words, if someone casts, say, a Swords to Plowshares targeting Blim with an attempt to exile it, we can cast Imp's Mischief, change the target, so we could even make them exile their own creatures if we want, and then we would lose life equal to that spell's mana value, which in the case of Swords to Plowshares would be 1. So while this could, in theory, do a ton of damage to us, I can't imagine that a lot of removal spells pointed at our commander are going to be more than 3-ish mana. So I don't think paying 3 life is a big downside for us when we can keep our commander in play. It's also worth mentioning that because Blim forces our opponents to discard cards, there is a world where we get most of our opponents down to pretty much top decking for the rest of the game, where they're just drawing the card from the top of their deck and trying to play it, so they're not going to have the opportunities to play around our redirection effects in a way that they might be able to if they had a full hand of cards. But those are all of our themes for this week. So the next thing I want to do is talk about some of our key cards. And these are going to be the cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do. And in some cases are win conditions, value engines, or for all intents and purposes, just kind of the MVPs of the deck. So the first card I want to talk about is going to be Crown of Doom. And on its face, this doesn't look like it's the best card in the deck, but when it's in play, it actually does a ton for us and really not our opponents. Because Crown of Doom is 3 mana for an artifact. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets +2/+0 until the end of turn. That is not a great effect. We do not want this card on our side of the battlefield. But it has an ability for 2. Target player other than Crown of Doom's owner gains control of it. Activate this ability only during your turn. This is one of those cards that we really want to make sure we can give away as soon as we play it. So it's either 5 mana or 3 mana and then attack with Blim or some other effect like Bizarre Trader. And what we want to do is give it to an opponent because then they cannot give it back to us. That almost forces our opponents to kind of play this ping pong game of giving each other the Crown of Doom, because whoever has it is going to take more damage on attacks, but at the same time is going to be losing more life and discarding more cards because of Blim, because this is a permanent they will control but not own. So it really forces our opponents into a situation where nearly every turn they're kind of forced to spend 2 mana just to get rid of the crown, or risk taking a ton of extra damage. So it's kind of like a massive stacks. Well, stacks isn't the right word. I guess tax is probably more effective because it's not preventing our opponents from doing things like a stacks piece would, but it's kind of slowing them down, like a tax sort of effect. Plus, it lets us do more damage, which, I can't be mad at that. I'm a Boros player at heart. I want to do more damage. Anyway, though, I think that's enough about Crown of Doom, so let's move on to our second key card, which is Lizard Blades. And this one looks a little bit strange at first because it's just 1 in a red for a 1/1 artifact creature equipment lizard. It has double strike, equipped creature has double strike, and it can reconfigure for 2. We are not a Voltron deck. We have no intention of just knocking people out with Blim. However, Blim's ability is triggered when it deals combat damage to an opponent. So if we can give Blim double strike, we can actually trigger his ability twice each turn, give away 2 permanents, and then we're still triggering that life loss and discard effect twice. So, for example, if an opponent has nothing from Blim, we hit them once, we give them 1 permanent, they lose 1 life, discard a card, then we hit them a second time, trigger it again, give them a second permanent, now they lose 2 life and discard 2 cards, which means that we made them lose 3 life, plus they took 8 damage from Blim, and they discarded 3 cards, all in one single attack. That will very quickly close out the game because now our opponents are taking a ton from Blim, so we kind of turn into a Voltron deck, I suppose. But at the same time, they're discarding all of their cards and aren't going to be able to have the answers they need because we're just stripping their hand pretty much clean of anything that could be useful. So double strike is massively important in this deck, and Lizard Blades is by far not the only way to give double strike, but it is one of the most efficient. Moving on to our final key card, this one is going to be Alexios, Deimos of Cosmos. Now, when I first put this card in here, I kind of threw it in as just like it's controlled by our opponents. It doesn't technically trigger with Blim because we get it back on our turn. But after playtesting this deck a little bit and looking through what it can do, Alexios is incredibly powerful. It's definitely one of those cards that is not necessarily the main win condition in the deck, but I would argue that it is kind of one of the main win conditions, if that makes any sense, because Alexios is 3 and a red for a 4/4 legendary creature human berserker. It's got trample, it attacks each combat if able, can't be sacrificed, and can't attack its owner. Then at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Alexios, untaps it, and puts a +1/+1 counter on it. It gains haste until the end of turn. So if we play this on turn 4, we can't attack with it because it doesn't have haste for us, but on the next player's turn, they get it. It's now a 5/5 haste trample that has to attack and can't attack us. For the next player, it's a 6/6, then a 7/7, and when we get it back, and the first time we can attack with it, it is an 8/8 trample that has to attack, which is not really a downside considering it's, an 8/8 with trample, but it's going to do so much damage as we go around the table, and that damage is only going to be amplified by the fact that we may have Crown of Doom in play. We may be able to put Lizard Blades onto Alexios, giving him double strike. We've got Blim that is stripping our opponent's hands and forcing them to lose life, and Alexios can close out games incredibly quickly. It's not, like I said, it's not the main win condition, but it is a win condition in the fact that we really want to make sure that it is dealing the damage, because then it looks like it is the win condition and our opponents view Alexios as the threat, maybe deal with him, and then we still have Blim to close out the game. So it's nice to kind of diversify our assets in a way, and Alexios does a phenomenal job at that. Moving on from our key cards though, now I want to talk a little bit about some cool interactions in the deck, and these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in some cases are really just there to work together in a way that some other cards in the deck can't. And obviously this is also for my own benefit. They are just kind of fun cards that sometimes I just like to highlight. So the first pair of cool interaction cards I want to highlight is going to be Lich's Mastery and Harmless Offering. Lich's Mastery, 3 black, black, black for a legendary enchantment. It has hexproof, you can't lose the game, and whenever you gain life, you draw that many cards, but whenever you lose life, for each 1 life you lose, exile a permanent you control, or a card from your hand or graveyard, and finally, when Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. This is one of those cards that, if you're in a life gain deck, is probably incredibly powerful. We are not a life gain deck, so we don't want Lich's Mastery. What we do want to do, though, is use a card like Harmless Offering to give it to our opponents. because Harmless Offering is kind of a backup Blim. It's 2 and a red for a sorcery. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. So being able to give our opponents the Lich's Mastery means that unless they're gaining a ton of life, they're really not going to be drawing a ton of cards. But if they take a hit from Blim, which is 4 damage, they've lost 4 life, so they have to now exile 4 permanents they control, cards from their hand, or cards from their graveyard. And at any point, if you cannot do those things, eventually you will have to exile the Lich's Mastery itself. And once you do that, you lose the game. So being able to give this to our opponents and then just kind of keep pinging at them, keep hitting them, eventually they're going to lose the game because they're not built around Lich's Mastery. They are not intending to try to win through this effect. And being able to give it away is just another way that we can take the bad cards in our deck and turn them into good cards for us. Moving on to our second cool interaction. This one is going to be between Plague Reaver and Bolt Bend. Now, Plague Reaver is one of my personal favorite cards to throw into decks like this. It is 2 and a black for a 6/5 beast, and yes, you heard that right. That's 3 mana in black for a 6/5. So obviously, some massive downside, right? At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice each other creature you control, or Plague Reaver can let you discard 2 cards and sacrifice the Plague Reaver, choose target opponent, return it to the battlefield under that player's control at the beginning of the next upkeep. This is one of those cards that if an opponent doesn't have the cards in hand to discard, they can very easily just keep losing their board every single turn as the Plague Reaver just slowly wipes out all their creatures. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe an opponent has not a ton of creatures, so they're not super concerned about it, and they've got a ton of cards in hand, so they don't mind discarding the cards to give it to someone else. The key to this is that the Plague Reaver's ability can be redirected with something like Bolt Bend, which is 3 and a red for an instant. It costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature power 4 or greater. Luckily for us, our commander has 4 power. And it simply says, change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. So if someone discards 2 cards and sacrifices Plague Reaver to try to, say, give it to us, we could actually cast Bolt Bend to redirect that ability, forcing it into another player's battlefield at the beginning of the next upkeep. And if that's the case, now that player has to discard some cards to give it to someone else or risk sacrificing their permanents. So this is how we can really take what is most likely going to be a 3v1 situation and push that kind of aggro and all of the negative effects onto our opponents while still keeping our board and our abilities intact. But that is enough on the cool interactions piece. So the next thing we're going to do for our deck tech is, of course, take a look at the price of the deck. And this week, the deck came in at $77.10, with our most expensive card being Silver Shroud Costume at $7.87. So if you do need to trim a little bit on the price, you can cut out the Silver Shroud Costume, trim it to about $70. However, I do recommend keeping it in because this is a phenomenal way to protect Blim. Because it is 2 mana for an artifact equipment, it has flash. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains Shroud until the end of turn, and equipped creature can't be blocked, plus equip for 3. So for 2 mana, we have an instant speed way to protect Blim from any removal effects. And then once it's equipped to Blim, it makes him unblockable, which is incredibly powerful when we want him to be dealing combat damage to opponents in order to trigger his abilities. So Silver Shroud Costume really does everything we want it to do for Blim, but like I said, it is almost an $8 card, so trimming it out of the deck is not the worst idea. We do have backup ways to protect Blim. We do also have backup ways to make him unblockable. This just happens to do both. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, then I do have a suggestion for you there as well. And the card I would recommend putting in this week would be Silent Arbiter, and the card I would recommend taking out would be Risky Move. So starting off with Silent Arbiter, it is 4 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 1/5. No more than one creature can attack each combat, and no more than one creature can block each combat. Now, this doesn't seem especially relevant for our deck, but when you keep in mind, we are really trying to give away most of our creatures because we don't really want them. They tend to be kind of a negative effect for everything. Silent Arbiter means that we only ever have to attack with Blim, but our opponents can only ever attack us with one creature as well, kind of saving us from the onslaught that we may get when we're giving them these terrible creatures and effects. Now, that does of course mean that there's going to be a lot of aggro directed toward us because people do like to attack with their creatures, but I think Silent Arbiter does a good job of preventing that from really affecting us. If, though, we are putting in Silent Arbiter, we do have to take a card out, and the card I would recommend taking out is Risky Move, which is 3 red, red, red for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Risky Move, and when you gain control of Risky Move from another player, choose a creature you control and an opponent, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, that opponent gains control of that creature. Now, when I put this in here, my initial thought was that this is a great way for us to give away our permanents. It's going to keep going around the table. It kind of messes with people's game plans. But again, in my testing with this, I realized a couple of different things. Number one is that Risky Move is never going to be under an opponent's control while it's our turn, so it's never going to benefit us with Blim. 2, we really don't intend on having that many creatures, which means that we are possibly risking giving away Blim, which is the worst thing we could do. If we give somebody Blim, we are in a bad situation because now they can start giving us things. But that actually ties pretty well into reason number 3 why I think this card should probably come out of the deck. And that is because Blim is universal. If we ever control something that we don't own, we also have to lose life and discard cards. Risky Move kind of allows our opponents to just all give us creatures with Risky Move, and then all of a sudden we are just completely out of luck with Blim, discarding 6 cards, losing 6 life, because we went around the table twice, everybody gave us a creature, they just happened to get their coin flips, and this can end very, very badly for us. So I don't think Risky Move is actually a card that should stay in the deck long term. It's not terrible, but I do think that having it in might honestly be more of a detriment than it is a benefit. And so obviously we try to avoid those cards, but that is my own opinion. Let me know in the comments if you disagree or if you think of other reasons maybe we should keep Risky Move in the deck. However, that does bring us to the end of our deck tech for this week. And before we jump into a game, because obviously we got to see how this deck performs in a game, I want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel, and of course, shout out all of our current patrons and channel members. So as always, you can always like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really does help out a lot. We're trying to make this final push up to 2,000 subscribers, so if you could help us get there, I would really appreciate it. Maybe share the channel with some friends who you think might be interested. I would very much appreciate all of that. However, if you do want to go a little bit above and beyond, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and right here on YouTube as a channel member. Joining at either of those locations gives you access to things like the deck lists a week early, gives you access to the unedited gameplay, gives you access to a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. And it's honestly just a great community on the Discord. Big fan of everyone in there. It's really a ton of fun. And then you also get a random card sent to you every single month from me. It will be one of the cards we built around for that month. Plus, as a quick shout out, we did just very recently add a new level to the Patreon. It is now the most expensive tier, so I do apologize for that. But I realized in building a lot of these decks, and this is a peek behind the scenes, I tend to proxy them out because I can't exactly afford to buy a brand new commander deck every single week, especially on a teacher's budget. So I do proxy them out. However, I've kind of just been recycling the proxies after I used them, and some members of my Discord mentioned that they might be interested in getting the proxies as well, because then they can try these decks out before they wind up buying them. So our new Patreon tier will get you a proxied list of one of the decks of the month sent to you every single month. And it won't include basic lands, I will preface that up front, but if that's something you're interested in, please do check it out. I am interested to see how this goes. I think it could be kind of cool, but give me some feedback. It's brand new. I would love to know what people think. With all of that being said, I want to highlight one last thing for the Patreon, and then I'll be done kind of rambling your ears off. I do also send out individualized tokens that go along with the cards that are sent out every single month. These are the ones that went out for April. They're usually a pretty big hit in the Discord with people trying to guess who's getting what, trying to hope that they get specific ones for their decks. So if this is another thing you're interested in, I can't promise to be the best artist in the world, but I think they're kind of fun. I am particularly a fan of the Alien Salamander because if you've ever seen Monsters, Inc., got to give a shout out to my boy Randall. But enough of the self-hype, so let's get into a game with our deck this week and see what we can do trying to blim out our opponents. And this week, we are of course joined by 3 opponents. In this case, it is Doodle playing Tygam Sidisi's Hand, we have Pia Nalar, Chief Mechanic, being played by Cole, and we have Galadriel, Light of Valinor, being played by Jason. So starting off with Tygam and Doodle's build, we have played a Tygam list on this deck before, and Doodle gave us a lot of suggestions for that, probably because those came from his own Tygam list. But the Tygam list that he is playing is very different than ours. He is an artifact deck that really wants to synergize with a lot of the artifact cards that care about graveyards, because he is mainly trying to win the game with Mirrodin Besieged, which is a card that wants you to have 15 artifacts in your graveyard, and then it just makes an opponent lose the game, which I think is a super cool and unique way to build Tygam. I've never seen somebody even come close to knocking someone out with Mirrodin Besieged, so as much as I'm hoping that he gets to knock someone out, I'm also kind of hoping that it is just not us. Moving on, though, to our second opponent this week, we have Cole and the new Pia Nalar. This deck can just kind of churn out a bunch of vehicles and energy, but I think Pia brings a very unique mix of vehicles and energy in a way that a lot of other commanders don't. So you don't typically see artifacts in the teamer colors, but you do see a lot of energy in those colors, so it's a nice way to kind of bridge that gap between the two. And I have no doubt that throughout the course of the game, Cole is going to make some absolutely massive Aether Jets, so that is one thing to be aware of, because if they can fly, they can block Blim, which is not where we want to be. And then, last but not least, Jason's Galadriel deck. This is, from what he's mentioned, kind of just a repurposed Chulane deck. So it has to deal with a lot of creatures that want to enter the battlefield. He wants to continuously play creatures and make tokens and draw cards and bounce creatures and have mana dorks and just a whole bunch of creature stuff. Because he's able to trigger Galadriel at least 3 times a turn, so he can make 3 green mana, put a counter on all of his creatures, scry 2, draw a card. It's just kind of a value city type of card, which is very much up Jason's alley. Now, if I had to pick an opponent to be the most concerned about in this game, it's probably Cole and the Pia deck, mainly because of what I said earlier. I think it's the flyers. I think that's going to be our biggest issue here. But let me know down in the comments if you have any predictions for the game. I always love hearing what decks people think are going to win. And of course, if you haven't already, I would love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot. But with all of that being said, let's jump into this game, see how we do, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Doodle, Cole, and then Jason. On my first turn, I play a mountain. Doodle plays a scene of the crime. Cole plays a frontier bivouac. Jason plays a seaside citadel. I play a rogue's passage, then cast Arcane Signet, and I also cast Sleeper Agent, which enters under Jason's control and does 2 damage to him in his upkeep. Doodle plays an island and then casts Ethereum Sculptor, making his artifact spells cost 1 less to cast. Cole plays an island and casts Attune with Aether, getting 2 energy and searching his library for a basic land, putting it into his hand. In Jason's upkeep, he loses 2 life, then plays a Plains, and after that he attacks me for 3 with the Sleeper Agent. In his second main phase, Jason also casts a Beast Caller Savant. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Pendant of Prosperity, which comes into play under Doodle's control. This lets him pay 2 to tap it, draw a card, and put a land from his hand into play, but if he does, then I also get to draw a card and put a land from my hand into play. Doodle casts Artificer's Assistant on his turn, letting him scry 1 whenever he casts a historic spell, and then also cast Perpetual Timepiece, scrying 1 and letting him tap it to mill himself for 2, or letting him pay 2 mana to exile the timepiece and shuffle any number of cards from his graveyard into his library. Cole plays a mountain and casts Whirler Virtuoso, getting 3 energy and now letting him pay 3 energy to create a 1/1 Thopter token, which he does immediately. In Jason's upkeep, he loses 2 life, then casts Coppermere and attacks Cole for 3 with the Sleeper Agent. On my turn, I play a Scavenger Grounds and cast my commander, Blim Comedic Genius. On Doodle's turn, he simply casts a Silvermere and scries 1. Cole plays a Karn's Bastion and casts Professional Facebreaker, making a treasure token whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to an opponent. This lets him attack Jason for 1 with a Thopter and make a treasure token. Then in his second main phase, Cole casts Decoction Module, getting an energy whenever a creature enters under his control, and letting him activate it for 4 mana to return a creature he controls to his hand. In Jason's upkeep, he loses 2 life, then casts Mara Leaf Pixie, and then also casts Goldmere. Finally, he moves to combat and attacks me for 3 with the Sleeper Agent before passing. On my turn, I cast a Rakdos Signet, and then use that to also cast Demonic Pact. But unfortunately, Doodle has a response, countering it with Swan Song and giving me a 2/2 bird token instead. On the bright side, this means I'm able to attack Cole for 4, triggering Blim when he deals combat damage, giving control of my new bird token to Cole, and making each opponent discard a card and lose life equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own, meaning each of my opponents lose 1 life and discard 1 card. Doodle plays a Mystic Sanctuary, then casts Mirrodin Besieged, naming Phyrexian when it enters, so now in his end step, he draws a card, discards a card, and if he has 15 or more artifacts in his graveyard, target opponent loses the game. After that, Doodle activates Perpetual Timepiece, milling himself for 2, and in his end step, draws a card and discards a card. Notably, since he has Golgari Thug in his graveyard, he's able to dredge the Golgari Thug, mill himself for 4, return it to his hand, and then also discard the Thug. Cole plays an Exotic Orchard and attacks me for 1 with a Thopter, and attacks Doodle for 2 with a bird, making 2 treasure tokens. Then, in his second main phase, Cole casts Nick Valentine Private Eye, getting an energy and letting him investigate whenever an artifact creature he controls dies. In Jason's upkeep, he loses 2 life, plays a forest, and casts his commander, Galadriel Light of Valinor. So whenever a creature enters under his control, he chooses 1 that hasn't been chosen this turn from among adding 3 green mana, putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls, or scrying 2 and drawing a card. Finally, he attacks me for 3 with the Sleeper Agent. On my turn, I play a mountain and attack Jason for 4 with Blim, giving him control of my Rakdos Signet, then making each opponent lose life and discard cards equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own, which is 2 for Jason and 1 for both Doodle and Cole. On Doodle's turn, he plays a swamp and casts Mirror Retriever, scrying 1, and when it dies, returning another artifact from his graveyard to his hand. Then, in his end step, Doodle draws a card and discards a card, instead dredging the Golgari Thug and once again discarding it. On Cole's turn, he casts his commander, Pia Nalar Chief Mechanic, getting an energy and now also getting 2 energy whenever one or more artifact creatures he controls deal combat damage to an opponent. Then he attacks me for 2 with Nick Valentine and attacks Jason for 1 with a Thopter, creating 2 treasures and 4 energy. In his second main phase, Cole casts a Stride Hanger Automaton, getting an energy and giving his Thopters +1/+1, and whenever he would create 1 or more artifact tokens, he also creates an additional Thopter token. In his end step, Pia triggers, letting him pay any amount of energy, make an XX Nalar Aetherjet Vehicle token with Flying and Crew 2, where X is the amount of energy he pays. With this trigger, he pays 6, making a 6/6 Aetherjet and another Thopter. In Jason's upkeep, he loses 2 life and moves straight to combat, deciding he's done taking damage from Sleeper Agent, so he makes a deal with Cole, attacking him for 3 so that Cole can crew his Aetherjet, block the agent, and kill it. Then in Jason's second main phase, he casts Guardian Project, letting him draw a card when he casts a creature, as long as it doesn't share a name with a creature in his graveyard or on his battlefield. On my turn, I cast Bazaar Trader, which can tap to give target opponent control of an artifact, creature, or land that I control. After that, I attack Doodle for 4 with Blim, giving him control of the Bazaar Trader, then he loses 2 life and discards 2 cards, while Jason and Cole both lose 1 life and discard 1 card. With the trigger on the stack, Cole casts the final card in his hand rather than discarding it, exiling Blim with Reality Shift and letting me manifest the top card of my library. At the end of turn, Doodle activates Pendant of Prosperity, drawing a card but not putting a land into play, while I also draw a card and put Contested War Zone into play, now letting any player who deals combat damage to me gain control of the War Zone. On Doodle's turn, he moves straight to combat, attacking me for 1 with the Artificer's Assistant, taking control of the Contested War Zone, but in response to the trigger, I do tap it so that Doodle doesn't gain access to the mana from it this turn. In his second main phase, Doodle casts Burnish Heart, scrying 1, and activates Bazaar Trader, giving me back the Contested War Zone. Then at the end of turn, he draws a card and discards a card, once again replacing the effect with the Golgari Thug, essentially just milling himself for 4. On Cole's turn, he casts an Aether Refinery, now doubling the amount of energy he would make whenever he would make energy. He can also activate the Refinery to get an energy, then pay any amount of energy to create an XX Aetherborn token, where X is the amount of energy he paid. After that, Cole attacks me for 2 with Nick Valentine, gaining control of Warzone, attacks Cole for 2 with a Thopter, and attacks Jason for 2 with a Thopter. This makes him a total of 3 treasure tokens and 3 Thopters, as well as 18 total energy. Then at the end of turn, Pia triggers, letting Cole pay 10 energy to make a 10/10 Aetherjet and another Thopter, getting 2 more energy. On Jason's turn, he casts Worship, so as long as he controls a creature, any damage that would put him to less than 1 life puts him to 1 life instead. On my turn, I play a Flamekin Village and attack Jason for 2 with my Manifest creature. Then, in my second main phase, I cast Deadly Cover-Up, destroying all creatures. In response, Doodle activates Perpetual Timepiece, milling himself for 2, and then he also sacrifices Burnished Heart, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. Still in response, Jason flashes in Guardian of Faith, scrying 2, drawing 2 cards, and phasing out all his other creatures, saving them from the board wipe, which then resolves. This lets Doodle return Soul Ring from his graveyard to his hand, while Cole creates 6 total clue tokens. On Doodle's turn, he plays a swamp, then casts a Soul Ring, which then lets him cast Matzalantli the Great Door, which can tap to let him draw a card and discard a card. This allows Doodle to activate Matzalantli using the Golgari Thug trick to mill himself for 4, then when he moves to his end step, he does the same thing, again milling himself for 4. He also mills himself for 2 more with Perpetual Timepiece, and sacrifices Scene of the Crime to draw a card, trying to get 15 cards in his graveyard for Mirrodin Besieged, but he winds up just short, getting only 14. On Cole's turn, he sacrifices a clue to draw a card, then casts Glimmer of Genius, scrying 2, drawing 2, and getting 2 energy, which turns into 4 with the Refinery. After that, he activates the Refinery, getting 2 more energy and paying 2 to create a 2/2 Aetherborn token, getting his 2 energy back. The token can then crew one of the Aether Jet, letting Cole attack me with it for 6. Then, in his second main phase, Cole plays an Ugin Sanctum and casts Solar Transformer, getting another 6 energy when it enters. In Jason's untap step, all of his creatures phase back in, and then he casts Tauren's Fist of the Angels, scrying 2, drawing 2, and letting him make a 1/1 human soldier token with training whenever he casts a creature spell. Once that's resolved, he also casts Silvermere, drawing another card, making a human token, making 3 green mana, and putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls. With that 3 mana, he's able to cast Palladium Mirror, drawing another card and making another human token. After that resolves, he plays a Plains, and finally, he moves to combat, attacking Cole for 7 with Galadriel and the Mana-Weft Pixie, taking control of the War Zone. On my turn, I cast a Demonic Lore, drawing 3 cards and now losing 2 life in my end step for each card in my hand. I also play a Desert of the Glorified, and in my end step, I have 4 cards in hand, so I lose 8 life. Also at the end of turn, Doodle activates Pendant of Prosperity, drawing a card and putting Nephalia Drownyard into play, while I also draw a card and put Temple of Malice into play, scrying 1. On Doodle's turn, he plays an island and casts his commander, Tygam Sidisi's Hand, skipping his draw step, but instead, looking at the top 3 cards of his library in his upkeep, putting 1 into his hand and the other 2 into his graveyard. After that, he activates Matzalantli, milling himself for 4 and finally getting more than 15 artifacts in his graveyard. This means that when he moves to his end step, he's able to mill himself for 4 more and use the Mirrodin Besiege to target Jason, knocking him out of the game. On Cole's turn, he casts Gonti's Aetherheart, getting an energy whenever an artifact enters under his control, and letting him pay 8 energy to exile the heart and take an extra turn after this one. Once that's resolved, he uses his Aetherborn to crew one of the Aether Jets, attacking Doodle with it for 10. Then in Cole's second main phase, he pays 8 energy with Gonti's Aetherheart, exiling it to take an extra turn after this one. He also activates the Refinery, getting 2 energy, paying 6 energy to make a 6/6 Aetherborn, and getting 2 more energy. Then, on Cole's extra turn, he casts Chandra Sparkhunter, which lets him crew a vehicle for free when he moves to combat on each of his turns. He then activates Chandra's Zero ability, making a 3/2 vehicle with a crew cost of 1. When he moves to combat, Chandra crews the 3/2 and gives it haste, allowing Cole to use his Aetherborn to crew both of the Aether Jets, attacking Doodle with them for 16, and he also attacks me for 3 with the new vehicle, claiming the War Zone. Then in his second main phase, Cole casts Royal Cartographer, getting an energy whenever a land enters under his control, and it can be tapped to let him pay 6 energy and draw 3 cards. Finally, he activates Aether Refinery, getting 2 energy, paying 8 energy, making an 8/8 Aetherborn, and getting back 2 energy. On my turn, I play a Swamp and recast my commander Blim, giving him haste with Flamekin Village. This lets me attack Cole for 4 with my commander, taking back Warzone and giving him control of demonic lore so that I don't die to it at the end of turn. This also makes both Cole and Doodle discard a card and lose a life. Doodle, though, not wanting to go down to only 1 life, casts Deadly Dispute, sacrificing Pendant of Prosperity to draw 2 cards and make a treasure token, meaning he no longer loses any life or discards any cards when Blim's ability resolves. Finally, at the end of turn, Doodle activates Perpetual Timepiece, milling himself for 2. On Doodle's turn, he plays a command tower and moves straight to his end step, milling himself for 4, triggering Mirrodin Besieged, targeting Cole, and knocking him out of the game. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Whisper Silk Cloak, immediately attempting to equip it to Blim so that he would have Shroud and Unblockable. Unfortunately, Doodle has a response, activating Tygam and exiling 4 cards from his graveyard to give Blim -4/-4 until the end of turn, killing my commander. At this point, my demonic lore is going to kill me on my end step, so I'm forced to cast Chaos Warp, targeting my own demonic lore just to keep myself in the game. This shuffles it back into my library, and I reveal the top card of my deck, putting it into play if it's a permanent, which it is, so I put a Swamp into play. On Doodle's turn, he plays a Phyrexia's Core and activates Mozzolantli, drawing a card and discarding a card. After that, he casts Palantir of Orthanc, and when he moves to his end step, I activate Scavenger Grounds, sacrificing my Desert of the Glorified to exile all graveyards. This allows Doodle to activate Perpetual Timepiece, exiling it to shuffle his graveyard back into his library. Then the Mirrodin Besieged resolves, he still draws a card and discards a card, but since he no longer has 15 artifacts in his graveyard, I don't lose the game. Also at the end of turn, Palantir triggers, getting an influence counter, letting Doodle scry 2, and then I choose to let him draw a card rather than mill a card. On my turn, I recast my commander Blim and again attempt to equip him with Whisper Silk Cloak. Once again, Doodle responds, activating Nephalia Drownyard, milling himself for 3 so that he can activate Tygam, exiling 4 cards from his graveyard, giving Blim -4/-4, and once again killing my commander. On Doodle's turn, he plays an Academy Ruins and moves straight to his end step, scrying 2, drawing 2 cards, and discarding a card. On my turn, I cast a Hithlain Rope, immediately activating it to draw a card and pass control of it to Doodle. After that, I also cast a Hot Soup, and at the end of turn, Doodle activates Nephalia Drownyard, once again milling himself for 3. On Doodle's turn, he cast a Junk Diver, letting him return an artifact from his graveyard to his hand when it dies, and then moves to his end step, triggering the Palantir and Mirrodin Besieged, scrying 2, drawing 2, and discarding a card. Also at the end of turn, I flash in a Dualcaster Mage that's been sitting in my hand for the entire game. Once that's resolved, but still at the end of turn, Doodle activates Tygam, exiling 2 cards from his graveyard to give my Dualcaster Mage -2/-2. This time though, I'm the one who has a response, casting Untimely Malfunction to change the target of Tygam's ability to the Junk Diver, giving it -2/-2 instead, killing it and letting Doodle return an artifact from his graveyard to his hand. Notably, before the trigger resolves, Doodle does use Phyrexia's Core to sacrifice the diver, meaning he gains a life as well. Now, with the trigger to return an artifact from his graveyard, I sacrifice my Scavenger Grounds to exile all graveyards, preventing Doodle from getting anything back. This means that on my turn, I'm finally able to equip Whisper Silk Cloak to a creature, equipping it to Dualcaster Mage to give it Shroud and Unblockable. Doodle attempts to find an answer, activating Mozzolantli to draw a card and discard a card, but he's unable to find an answer. Then, when I attack with the mage, I can activate Contested War Zone for quite possibly the first time it's ever been activated in Commander, giving all attacking creatures +1/+0, hitting Doodle for exactly 3 life, knocking him out, and winning me the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. It was very cool to get to see everybody's decks do exactly what they want to do. But if we're being honest, I kind of just rode Doodle's coattails to victory in this one. I don't know if I necessarily deserved the victory at the end there, but I kind of just cleaned up some of the mess that was left behind. Mainly because Doodle really did carry that game, knocking out both Jason and Cole with Mirrodin Besieged, which was super cool to see. And notably, he and I made a deal pretty early on once my Scavenger Grounds hit the board, that as long as he didn't target me with the Mirrodin Besieged, then I wasn't going to exile his graveyard, and Doodle is always a man of his word, so he did stick to that deal. But as soon as our opponents were gone, and I knew that the next trigger would have to come at me, that's when our deal kind of ended. I was able to exile his graveyard, but I do think that that Scavenger Grounds was really the only reason I didn't die, and I think that Doodle didn't win. There was also a point at the end of the game where Doodle had been holding up a counterspell in the hopes that he could stop whatever big thing was going to come his way, and he chose not to counter the Dualcaster Mage and chose not to counter the repurposing. But part of the issue, and I know that he got very frustrated with this, is that I don't think there was ever a good time for that counterspell. Because his concern here was that if I had been able to land the Dualcaster Mage, he could counter the redirect, but then I would have Blim and he couldn't counter that. Or if he countered the Dualcaster Mage, then I would still have the redirection and I could recast Blim, redirect the Tygam effect anyway. So it was just a very unfortunate circumstance for Doodle to be in at the end of that game. And while like I said, I know that he got frustrated with maybe holding the counterspell a little too long, I don't think there was ever a point where it was really going to be as effective as he wanted, which is a little unfortunate, but means that we could squeeze out the victory in the end. As for our other opponents, Cole and Jason, their decks did what they really wanted to do. I think Cole and Jason, both on the terms that they died, really were the threat at the table, which is yet another reason where we were kind of able to sneak in and clean up at the end, is because Doodle knew that he had to deal with both of them or they were going to deal with him. And that allowed the rest of the table to really kind of shift their focus, deal with Jason, all of his counters and his nonsense with all of his enter the battlefield effects, and then deal with Cole with all of his energy and his vehicles. And then we just kind of had that stalemate at the end between Doodle and I, which was eventually broken by, I guess, among other things, a Dualcaster Mage, which is kind of cool. So I hope you all enjoyed the game. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. If you did, please do let me know down in the comments. If you have any suggestions for future videos, I would love to hear that as well. I'm always looking for new cards to build around. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all for liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.